Sometimes the smallest voice can change everything. Stay with us to witness a story you'll never forget. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Ethan Caldwell's office was the kind of place that radiated power. It wasn't simply an office, it was a declaration. Oak-paneled walls carried the smell of polished wood. A giant map of the world stretched across one side as if to remind anyone who entered just how far his influence reached. And in the middle of his sleek mahogany desk sat the one object people never forgot once they saw it: a vintage red rotary phone. That phone was more than a piece of decoration. It was the direct line to the people who mattered most: his investors, his partners, the kind of voices that controlled the flow of hundreds of millions of dollars. Ethan had chosen the color deliberately: bright red, impossible to ignore, a symbol of urgency and wealth. And yet at 35 years old, sitting there in his sharp scarlet suit that matched his reputation, Ethan Caldwell found himself staring at that phone with something he had not felt in years: fear. The shrill ring cut through the quiet like a blade. Ethan's chest tightened. He leaned back slightly, his eyes fixed on the phone as if it were a time bomb. His jaw clenched and a bead of sweat rolled slowly down his temple. He wasn't supposed to hear that sound today. The deal with the Middle Eastern investor had already been laid out. Their translator, a seasoned professional Ethan trusted with every word, was away on vacation. Ethan had sighed in relief just 2 days earlier, thinking he had a rare week to breathe, free from the pressure of delicate negotiations. But now the phone was ringing. "What do I do?" His voice cracked low, half to himself, half to his assistant. Caroline, his assistant of 5 years, froze at her station across the room. Normally composed, she looked pale, almost ghost-like, her eyes darting between Ethan and the phone. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She knew as well as he did what was at stake. That line was worth $866 million. A single wrong word could collapse everything they had been building for months. A misstep now wouldn't just cost money, it would destroy Ethan's reputation. And in his world, reputation was the sharpest blade of all. The phone rang again. Ethan's throat tightened. He raked a hand through his perfectly styled hair, pacing in front of his desk. "If I answer, I'll ruin it. I don't speak a word of Arabic. If I don't answer, I'll lose him. What do I do?" Caroline opened her mouth but closed it again quickly, her lips trembling. She had no answer, and then, out of the corner of his eye, Ethan saw something that didn't belong in this polished, high-powered world. Sitting quietly by the window, her small legs dangling above the floor, was Sophia, Maria's daughter. Maria, his cleaning lady, had asked earlier that morning if she could bring her little girl to work. She hadn't found childcare and didn't want to risk losing her job. Distracted, Ethan had waved a dismissive hand, barely listening, telling her it was fine. He expected the girl to sit quietly while Maria dusted and polished the office like she always did. And, for the most part, that's exactly what had happened. Maria moved silently, wiping down shelves, polishing the glass coffee table, her eyes always lowered, careful never to intrude. Sophia, dressed in a pink blouse that seemed out of place in this heavy, serious room, had curled up near the window with a small notebook she carried everywhere. But now, as the shrill cry of the phone echoed again, it was Sophia's wide, curious eyes that followed Ethan as he paced. Ethan's stomach churned. He hated this. He hated feeling powerless. He had spent his career cultivating an image of control. Every detail of his life was rehearsed, planned, executed with precision. Yet here he was, undone by a phone call. The ring screamed again. He slammed his hand against the desk. "Damn it!" His voice was harsher than he intended, sharp enough that Maria flinched, nearly dropping the rag she held. Caroline stiffened in her seat. Sophia didn't flinch. She tilted her head, studying him. Her small fingers tapped nervously on her notebook, but her eyes didn't waver. The phone rang again. Ethan's chest rose and fell, ragged, his thoughts racing. I can't answer. I can't. One wrong sentence and everything collapses. One mistake and it's gone. What do I do? His voice dropped into a mutter again. No one answered him. The office felt suffocating. The polished wood, the shining red suit, the heavy silence between rings, it all pressed in on him. He looked at Caroline, but she only shook her head slightly, her face pale. He looked at Maria, but she stood frozen, her hands trembling as she wrung her cloth. And then he looked again at the child. Sophia had pushed her notebook aside. She was sitting straighter now, her legs swinging with quiet determination. She leaned forward, eyes fixed on the red phone. Ethan's breath caught. What was she doing? The phone rang again, shrill, demanding. Sophia slid off the chair. The sound of her small shoes tapping against the polished floor was almost lost under the ring, but Ethan heard it. His stomach tightened as he realized where she was going. He stepped forward, panic flooding his voice. What are you doing? Sophia turned her head slightly, her expression calm, though her small hands trembled at her sides. Her voice was soft, but steady. You're scared, she said simply. The words hit him like a slap. But I'm not. And with that, she took another step toward the desk. Ethan froze, his voice trapped in his throat. Caroline gasped softly. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. The phone rang again. Sophia reached out her tiny hand toward the heavy receiver, and Ethan Caldwell, a man who had built his empire on control and confidence, felt the ground shift beneath him as he realized something was about to happen in this room that none of them would ever forget. Sophia's hand hovered near the heavy red phone, but for a moment the world seemed to pause. The shrill ringing filled the office, but inside her, something older and deeper was stirring. A memory. A longing that had followed her for years. Because this wasn't the first time she had heard Arabic spoken. It had started long before today, back when she was barely 6. Every time Maria brought her to Ethan's building, Sophia would sit quietly with a book or sketch pad, pretending to be absorbed in her own world. But her real attention was fixed on the translator, who often sat across from Ethan, speaking in quick, fluid phrases that felt like music. She didn't understand a word at first, but the rhythm of it, the sound, caught her imagination in a way nothing else had. She would go home at night and whisper those sounds under her breath, repeating them until they no longer felt foreign. Her mother often caught her in the small kitchen of their apartment, mouthing strange words while she stirred her cereal or sat by the window. "Why are you wasting your time?" Maria scolded once, shaking her head. "It's just noise. You need to focus on school." But to Sophia, it wasn't noise. It was treasure. She begged her mother to let her check out books from the library. Children's dictionaries, phrase books, anything with foreign letters. She sat on the edge of the bed, tracing the unfamiliar script with her finger, whispering syllables like spells. At school, while other kids played at recess, she muttered strange phrases under her breath, copying the sound she remembered from Ethan's office. Her mother didn't understand, but she didn't forbid it either. And when Sophia discovered that the elderly man living 2 doors down, Mr. Farouk, a retired Syrian professor, actually spoke Arabic fluently, she nearly burst with joy. It had taken courage to knock on his door. She was small, nervous, clutching a crumpled notebook. Can you teach me?" she had asked shyly. The man, startled, studied her for a long moment before smiling gently. "You want to learn? Very well, but you must work hard. Arabic is not easy." Sophia had nodded eagerly. She worked harder than anyone expected. She filled her notebook with scribbled words, practiced every evening until her throat ached, whispered sentences to herself as she fell asleep. To her, language was more than a skill. It was a key, a secret bridge to another world. Her mother still thought it was a child's game. "Sophia, what will this do for you? We don't have money for fancy schools. Don't fill your head with dreams that go nowhere." But Sophia never stopped. At 8 years old, she carried within her more Arabic than anyone realized. And now, as she stood in Ethan Caldwell's office, the red phone ringing like a drumbeat, she felt all of that come rushing back. Ethan didn't know any of this. To him, she was just a maid's daughter, a quiet child sitting in the corner while adults did important things. Caroline didn't know either. She only saw a little girl in a pink blouse, her hair tied back with a ribbon, standing too close to a phone that could cost them everything. But Sophia knew. She knew she had been preparing for this moment all her short life. The ring stabbed the air again. Ethan was pacing, muttering under his breath, his red suit flashing as he turned. "I can't answer. I'll ruin everything. I can't. I can't." His voice was sharp, almost panicked. Caroline's pale face was frozen, her lips parted but no words coming out. Maria stood in the corner, clutching her rag, her knuckles white. She wanted to call her daughter back to tell her to sit down and stop this madness, but something in her daughter's eyes, calm, steady, braver than anyone else in the room, kept her rooted in place. Sophia took another step toward the desk. Ethan snapped his head toward her, his voice cutting like glass. "What are you doing?" "You're scared," Sophia said softly. Her voice was thin but steady, carrying across the tense room. The words silenced him. Her eyes, wide and serious, didn't waver. "But I'm not." The phone rang again, louder, harsher, almost impatient. Ethan's heart pounded. He wanted to scream at her to stop, to go back to her seat, but his voice caught in his throat, because deep inside, some part of him recognized that this child carried a calmness he no longer had. Sophia's small fingers brushed the receiver. For a flicker of a moment, she remembered sitting in her neighbor's apartment, Mr. Farouk, correcting her pronunciation with patient care. She remembered repeating phrases until they rolled smoothly off her tongue. She remembered lying awake at night whispering, "One day I'll do it. One day I'll be the one to speak." And now that day had come. Maria whispered, almost choking, "Sophia, please, don't." But Sophia's hand tightened on the receiver. The phone's shrill cry cut off as she lifted it, pressing the weight against her small ear. "Hello?" she said, her voice trembling at first. Her free hand clutched her notebook against her chest. A deep male voice spilled into her ear, speaking rapidly in Arabic. Caroline gasped. Ethan froze. Maria's knees almost gave way, but then Sophia's lips moved. Arabic poured out of her, soft at first, then stronger, steadier, like a river finally finding its course. Ethan's stomach dropped. He could hardly breathe. Caroline gripped the edge of her desk, staring in disbelief. Maria pressed both hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and fear. And Sophia, her pink blouse glowing against the dark wood, her small frame dwarfed by the massive chair she now stood beside, held the red phone tightly, her young face glowing with a courage no one in the room had expected. The moment had come. She was no longer whispering strange words in secret. She was using them. She was standing between worlds, doing what she had always dreamed of. The bridge she had built in her mind was suddenly real. The red receiver looked too large in Sophia's small hands. The coiled cord twisted around her fingers as she pressed it to her ear. The first flood of Arabic rushed toward her, quick and demanding, a stream of words that might have terrified another child. But Sophia's eyes sharpened. She steadied her breath, let the sound wash through her. and then opened her mouth. Arabic poured out. At first, her voice trembled, a thin thread of sound. Then, as the sentences formed, as the words she had whispered at night finally fit into place, she found her rhythm. Her tone grew firmer, more certain. What had once been a dream spoken into the quiet of her bedroom was now reality. Fill in a skyscraper office where millions hung in the balance. Caroline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Maria clutched the rag in her fists, her eyes wide, tears already threatening. Ethan froze behind his desk, his knees weak, watching a child do what he, a man with power and wealth, could not. On the other end, the investor's voice sharpened. "Who is this?" he demanded. Sophia's brow furrowed. She sat a little straighter in the big leather chair beside the desk. "This is Mr. Caldwell's office," she said in Arabic, her words careful but fluent. "His translator is on vacation, so I am speaking." A pause. Then, to everyone's shock, laughter rumbled through the line. "A child," the man said, amusement in his deep voice. Ethan's throat tightened. He mouthed frantically toward her, his lips forming soundless words. "What did he say?" Sophia turned to him briefly, covering the receiver with her hand. "He said, a child. But he's not angry, only surprised." Caroline let out a tiny gasp. Ethan swallowed hard, then nodded, whispering urgently, "Keep him talking." Sophia returned the receiver to her ear. Her voice was steadier now, her posture firm. She listened as the man's tone shifted from amusement back to business. His pace quickened, and though some of the words were heavier than she had practiced, Sophia's mind pieced them together like a puzzle. "We spoke before," the investor said, "about the money. I want to know if Mr. Caldwell agrees to my condition. Less risk. A smaller first step." Sophia's eyebrows drew together. She weighed each word, each phrase until the meaning crystallized. She turned toward Ethan, her voice calm and slow. "He's asking if you still want to try small first, not big." Ethan's breath came in a rush. He understood instantly. The man wanted to lower the risk, start with something smaller than the original agreement. Ethan leaned forward, whispering with urgency. "Tell him yes. Yes, small first is good, then bigger later." Sophia nodded firmly and repeated the words in Arabic, shaping them with clarity. "Mr. Caldwell says yes. Small first is good, later more big." On the other end, there was silence for a moment. Then the investor's voice softened, a deep approval lacing his tone. "Good. Then we agree. Tell him I am happy. Tell him he is wise." Sophia's eyes lit up. She turned to Ethan, smiling with pride. "He says he's happy. He says you are smart." The tension in the room cracked like glass. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His shoulders sagged. Caroline leaned back against the wall, her eyes wide in disbelief. Maria's hands shook as she pressed them to her chest, staring at her daughter as if she were watching a miracle unfold. But the conversation wasn't over. The investor's voice deepened again. "Tell Mr. Caldwell I will send the papers tomorrow. Then we sign a good future together." Sophia translated with precision, her little voice steady. "He will send papers tomorrow. You and him will be friends." Ethan almost laughed out loud with relief. His eyes glistened as he whispered quickly, "Tell him thank you. Tell him he is a good partner." Sophia nodded and in her clear voice said in Arabic, "Thank you. Mr. Caldwell says you are a good friend." The man chuckled warmly. "And thank you, little one. You are brave. One day you will be greater than a translator." Sophia's lips parted in shock. Her eyes widened, shimmering. She turned to Ethan, whispering softly, "He said, I am brave." Maria let out a sob she couldn't hold back, clapping her hand over her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks. Caroline's chest rose and fell quickly, her eyes darting between Ethan and the child at his desk. Finally, the investor's voice grew softer. "Goodbye, little one. Goodbye, Mr. Caldwell. We will speak again soon." The line clicked. Sophia gently set the red receiver back into place. The shrill ringing was gone, replaced by a silence that was no longer heavy but electric, charged with disbelief. For a long moment, no one in the room moved. Ethan stood frozen, his palm pressed against his chest, his breath unsteady. Caroline remained pale, her eyes locked on the girl in awe. Maria's face was wet with tears, her whole body trembling with pride and shock. And Sophia, this 8-year-old in her pink blouse, sat quietly in the massive leather chair, her chest rising and falling quickly, her cheeks flushed from the adrenaline. She had done it. She had stood in the gap where no one else dared. The red phone, the symbol of Ethan's power, looked almost small now, resting silently on the desk where a child had just wielded it like a bridge between worlds. "You—" Ethan's voice cracked. He swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on Sophia. "You just saved me." Sophia tilted her head, her voice soft, almost puzzled. "I just said what he said. It wasn't hard." "Not hard?" Ethan let out a breathless laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "You just translated a deal worth $866 million. Maria's knees gave way, and she gripped the chair beside her to keep from collapsing. Caroline's lips trembled, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't form words. Sophia lowered her gaze shyly. Her small hands twisted in her lap, but her smile glimmered through. She hadn't saved millions for herself, hadn't sought glory. She had only wanted to help, and yet she had changed everything. The silence in the office was almost unbearable. The shrill of the red phone had vanished, leaving behind only the sound of uneven breaths and the echo of what had just happened. Sophia sat still in the oversized leather chair, her pink blouse glowing faintly against the dark wood. The receiver rested quietly on its hook, but its weight still lingered in the room. Maria's hands trembled as she stepped forward, her eyes shining with tears. "She's always loved languages," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Since she was little. Every time I brought her here, she listened to the man who translated for you. She copied the words under her breath. She begged me for books, for lessons." Her voice faltered and she pressed a hand over her mouth. "I thought it was just a game, but it wasn't. She dreamed of this." Sophia lowered her head shyly, her cheeks flushed. Her small hands twisted in her lap. "I just wanted to be like him," she said softly, glancing up at Ethan. "The man who helps you talk. He makes people understand each other. I wanted to do that too." Ethan stood frozen, his chest heaving, his mind racing. Caroline, pale and wide-eyed, kept looking back and forth between her boss and the child, as if waiting for the storm to break. Everyone in the room expected the same thing, that Ethan Caldwell, the man known for his pride and sharp tongue, would snap. That he would scold the girl for her recklessness, maybe even fire Maria on the spot for allowing it. That was the weight hanging in the air. Maria seemed to feel it most of all. She clutched her rag tightly in both hands, her knuckles white, her body trembling. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice breaking, "don't be angry with her. She didn't mean any harm. She only wanted to help." Caroline braced herself, her lips pressed together, her eyes fixed on Ethan. She had seen him lash out before, had seen his anger cut down seasoned executives. How much harsher would it be toward a child? But Ethan didn't speak. He didn't move. He only stood, staring at the girl who had just saved him, his red suit catching the glint of afternoon light spilling through the tall window. Sophia's eyes lifted timidly, her small voice carrying across the room. I wasn't trying to be bad, she said. I just didn't want you to lose. The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. His breath caught, and something inside him shifted. Slowly, deliberately, he walked around his desk. His staff held their breath, waiting for his fury. Maria pressed a hand to her chest, shaking her head in silent pleas. Caroline's nails dug into the edge of the desk. And then Ethan did something no one in that room could have imagined. He stopped in front of Sophia and lowered himself down onto one knee. Gasps rippled through the office. Caroline's hand flew to her mouth. Maria nearly collapsed, steadying herself against the wall, her eyes wide with disbelief. The millionaire who had built his empire on confidence, wealth, and unshakable pride knelt on the polished floor in front of a maid's daughter. His eyes, usually sharp and guarded, were softer now, almost wet. You just saved a deal worth $866 million, Ethan said, his voice low, thick with emotion. And you did it with courage no adult in this room had. Not Caroline, not your mother, not even me. Sophia's lips trembled. Her small eyes glistened as she whispered, I just wanted to help. Ethan gave a faint, unsteady smile. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his gold-embossed business card. Gently, he pressed it into her small hand. The card looked oversized between her fingers. One day, he said softly, when you're older, call me. Whatever you dream to be, a translator, a teacher, anything, I'll make sure you have that chance. Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks as she covered her face with her hands. She could not believe what she was witnessing. Caroline's chest rose and fell rapidly, her eyes fixed on her boss with disbelief. She had worked for him for years and had never once seen him lower himself to anyone, let alone a child. Ethan finally rose to his feet. His movements were deliberate, steady. He turned slowly to face the room. His gaze swept across Caroline, Maria, and the few other staff who had gathered in the doorway, drawn by the ringing phone and the strange commotion. Today, he said firmly, his voice carrying, she reminded me that money doesn't build bridges. People do, respect does, and this little girl deserves mine more than anyone here. Sophia clutched the card to her chest, her tears finally breaking into a smile. Maria sobbed openly now, her body shaken. Caroline's lips parted in shock, but no words came. The man who had built his reputation on untouchable pride had humbled himself before a child. And in that moment, the entire balance of the room changed. The millionaire was no longer the most powerful figure in the office. The little girl was. The office remained suspended in silence, though not the heavy silence of fear from before. This was different, charged, alive, trembling with the weight of what had just unfolded. Ethan Caldwell, the man who had never bent to anyone, had bowed to a child, and no one who witnessed it would ever forget. Maria was still crying softly, her hands covering her face as tears slipped between her fingers. Caroline stood stiffly, her lips parted in disbelief, her eyes darting between her boss and the little girl who had turned the entire balance of the room upside down. Other employees lingered at the doorway, frozen, unsure if they had truly seen what they thought they had seen. And in the middle of it all sat Sophia, clutching the golden business card to her chest as though it were the most precious treasure in the world. Ethan looked down at her. His sharp features softened, his voice steady but quiet. Sophia, he said, speaking her name with care. You did something today no one expected. You reminded me that power doesn't come from wealth. It comes from courage, from people willing to stand up and act even when they're afraid. Sophia blinked, her eyes still glistening. I wasn't brave, she whispered. I was just helping. Ethan let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, though it was heavy with emotion. That's exactly what bravery looks like. Maria lowered her hands at last, her face wet with tears. She stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you for not being angry, for seeing her." Ethan shook his head, his tone firm. "Don't thank me. She earned this moment. I only had the sense to recognize it." He turned, addressing not just Maria and Caroline, but everyone who had gathered at the edge of the room. His voice carried, deep and certain, echoing against the oak-paneled walls. "What happened here today will not be forgotten. A child reminded us that respect is worth more than profit, that humility is greater than pride, and that sometimes the smallest voice in the room can save the largest deal." Caroline swallowed hard, her eyes still wide, but something in her gaze shifted. Respect, not just for Sophia but for her boss as well, though she could hardly believe she was seeing him this way. Ethan looked back at Sophia, kneeling slightly so his eyes were level with hers again. "One day, when you're older, you'll call me. And whatever your dream is, translator, teacher, anything at all, I'll make sure the door is open for you." Sophia's lips trembled as she whispered, "Even if I just want to help people talk?" Ethan's smile was small but real, especially then. Maria's tears came fresh at those words. She turned her face slightly, overcome, unable to speak. Sophia held the card tighter, her shoulders lifting with a shaky breath. For the first time in her young life, she felt as though the dream she whispered into her pillow at night was not just a fantasy. It was real. It had been seen. It had been recognized by a man the world considered untouchable. The golden card pressed against her small chest was not just a promise of opportunity. It was proof that she was no longer invisible. Ethan straightened and turned toward his staff, his expression sharpening slightly, though the softness in his eyes remained. "You all witnessed this," he said, "and let it be a lesson. Wealth is nothing if you forget the value of people. Money may move deals, but respect builds futures." A hush fell deeper across the room. No one dared to argue. Ethan turned back to Sophia one last time. "You didn't just save a contract, Sophia. You changed me. And that's worth more than the millions we spoke about today." Her small smile broke through her tears then, fragile but radiant. She whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, she wasn't just a maid's daughter. She was the girl who had stepped into the silence, answered a call worth hundreds of millions, and reminded everyone in that office, millionaire or maid, assistant or child, that courage can rise from the most unexpected place. For Ethan Caldwell, the deal had been saved. For Maria, her daughter's gift had finally been seen. But for Sophia, it was something greater. It was the beginning of a future where she was no longer just watching from the corner, whispering words no one understood. She was the bridge. And everyone in that office knew it. If this story moved you, make sure to like and subscribe for more powerful tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you.